What up? It's your boy Dragon, and this is another video, and the last probably of the series of the Dracolich problem, where I've been talking about some issues that arise from the first problem, which is the Dracolich problem. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the tanky gear, the aesthetics, thematics, mechanics, and gameplay, of course. So we're going to talk about that, but for the first part, I actually have a special guest, so let's get into that. Alright guys, I have ACPL here to help me talk about tank armor and its thematics and visual aesthetics. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions and get your thoughts on them. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. So I'm interested to hear what you say. So let's get into the questions here. So first one is, what are your thoughts on current visual thematics and tank armor of RuneScape?
I think for the current thematics of tank armor, mage and melee do it pretty well. But I'm gonna say right now that range is the outlier. I think it does worse when it comes to the thematics and visuals of tank armor. For Necro though, Necro has a lot of potential for what it could be for tank armor. I'm just gonna leave it there that there's just a lot of potential for what Necro tank armor could look like. But yeah, those are my general thoughts about the current thematics of tank armor. Melee and mage does well. Range sucks, and there's a lot of potential for necromancy.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. It sounds like kind of we have matching ideas on that. So that actually leads me into my next question for you. So, what would be important for the aesthetics of the armor to have that actual visual um, gear to match kind of the gameplay, and how would it look?
So I go into depth in this in my video series, just talking about the visual design of combat styles, and each combat style has its own specific thematics, I guess, for their tank armor. So I mentioned this for melee. Melee is very, solid. Like the tank armor for melee looks like it's rock solid. It looks like a cliff. Magic is the most interesting out of all the four combat styles because it's nature based, or if you want to be more specific about it, it's fungus based. Because you look at Ganodermic and Crypt Bloom, those are all mushrooms, which I thought is like really interesting from a visual standpoint. And as for range, I don't know, man. I just released a video on this, and range is very messy when it comes to its visuals. It doesn't do a do it doesn't do a good job for conveying what is a tank armor. And necromancy at the moment, there's not really that much of a difference other than the color schemes. But again, there's a lot of potential for what it could be. So yeah, those are my thoughts on like matching the aesthetics to the gameplay.
Yeah, and I think they probably have some design ideas for their necromancy gear. So it sounds like that's kind of the content they want to push for. So we'll have to see if they kind of lean into like a more visually appealing set when it comes to actually having some bolstered defenses rather than kind of the mage robes that it is now. But do you think the gameplay currently matches the aesthetics of the tank gear? Because I feel like the entire game is just based around damage anyway. So I don't know if it's visually it needs to be tank gear if no one really is interested in tanking.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that up because I feel that no, the gameplay does not match with the aesthetics. Here's the thing that all the tank armor uses one ability book, and that's the defense ability book. So they all share the same abilities. It's very one dimensional. Imagine if each combat style, like the tank armor, builds off of the combat style. So I mentioned that magic is a mushroom and nature based um, aesthetic. So what if like the abilities when you're using um, tank armor it also matches that? Likewise for melee, melee is a very aggressive and stubborn aesthetic. So what if the tank armor matched that aesthetic too? And range, uh, it has some issues when it comes to its abilities, but it's the same thing. Like, what if the tank armors match their style, uh, gameplay wise? Just so, I guess for another example is like barricade. Barricade has some overrides that you can put over it. And so there's like the molten barricade and the ice barricade, and that's kind of like what I'm talking about. Like, what if the abilities match the gear and the gear match the abilities? So that's my thought on those. So like having them unique and matching their actual combat style and combat abilities would be nice to see.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's only one defensive book, so that also limits the probably the visual design, and with MTX being a pressing issue, it seems like they want to lean more in that direction of just overrides rather than changing some of the core abilities. But if there was something you could change about the visual design to match the gameplay, would it be that adding like unique defensive books or specific animations that do slightly different things but using the same like core abilities?
Yeah, I think that would be something that would be interesting and help the gameplay, because you want the gameplay to match like where you're sitting and what you're doing. So I think having it the visuals and the abilities match to what combat style you're using would be a great thing to do. And one other thing I would change is of course range. Range is like I mentioned this before. I'm being like a broken record here, but range really has a problem when it comes to conveying um, its visual design for tank armor. It's trying to be one thing, but it doesn't catch up to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. So, yeah, I mean, me personally, I'm just more interested in balance first, and then I'd like to move into those things later. I think complexity in the game is something that's missing, but um, visuals to me is kind of like the one thing that gives you that game immersion, and I feel like RuneScape kind of lacks that in a lot of areas as far as the feel of each combat style. So, man, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us. Is there anything you'd like to say before you go?
No, I'm just glad that you invited me over and happy to talk about anything in all visual design and aesthetics for RuneScape. So yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem, man. And then I will leave your videos in the description of my video, just so people can check them out. Specifically, I'm gonna do all three of the visual gameplay ones of melee, range, and magic because those were really good videos, and I really like them. So shout you out where I can, and hopefully I can have you on in the future.
Yeah, appreciate it. Looking forward to
Thanks,
it.
man. Alright, so now that we've covered some of the visual design of tank gear, I would personally like to talk about the gameplay and some changes I'd like to see done to the actual gear itself. So I'm going to start this part here and kind of talk about some of the changes I want to see made to tank gear as a whole. So the main idea behind changing tank gear is to make it, one, more accessible, but two, make it a little bit better gear set overall to be using in any of the combat styles, not just for magic because of curriculum. So some of the problems with tank gear. We're going to start with the first one, that power gear is just by far better because the defensive rating isn't that much of a difference when you don't get any offensive bonus, so power armor is way better. Next one is most tank armor doesn't actually provide an HP boost compared to like Death Warden, so I think that is a huge thing where it lacks durability. I would say the third problem is accessibility for all the gear sets between, ports being time gated, otherwise the lockouts for raids being another huge issue on obtaining higher end tank gear. So with those problems, it's not nearly as accessible as I think it should be. So the first major change I would make is to add the Acto effect to all styles based on the shield level. So this would be pretty simple. It works kind of the same way that it currently does, but with this, the shields themselves are going to be not necessarily a requirement for the Acto effect. To be resetting defensives, that can be just based on the gear, but at a reduced rate. So right now it's like 8%, but it would essentially be at tier 90 with 5 pieces. I would have it about 4.5%, and when you're wearing any piece, it gives you a chance to reset your defenses. Of course, still the 1 minute cooldown. Now when you wear the shield, it also does give you additional damage, so I'd like to add that to all tank gear to make it more viable from level 1 all the way on up. So the next thing I'd like to do is add HP values to every single set of tank armor in the game to match that of Death Warden, which is essentially 500 per 10 levels for a full 5-piece gear set. So scaling it all the way from tier 10 up to tier 90, that would add 4,500 HP at the top end, and this is artificial durability because it doesn't reduce the damage you take, it just gives you more health to work with. The next thing I want to talk about is increasing shield's effectiveness when using abilities that require shields. So pretty simply put, there's going to be a table on screen and all these abilities require a shield to be used. So what's going to happen is the effectiveness of that ability is going to be scaled based on the tier of shield that you're using. So Barricade already does this in the game, so it starts at tier 1 and it lasts for 4.8 seconds, and then once you have a tier 90 shield, it lasts for 10.2 seconds. So it starts at 8 ticks, going up to 17 ticks, and it adds 1 tick per 10 shield tier levels. So what this means is I basically want to add this effectiveness to everything. So when you use that with Reflect, a tier 90 shield actually does give you an increased 0.6 seconds for that ability. Then I've got Preparation scaled as well. But there's a couple other here, so like Rejuvenate is a prime example, that instead of lasting 16 ticks at the start, it will be 25 ticks at the end when you're at the tier 90. And then when you go down to Revenge, again, same thing, scaling almost up to 20 seconds, not quite. And Immortality actually gets nerfed by quite a bit because at tier 1 it's only 19.2 seconds, all the way at the top end of tier 90 it will be back to the normal 30 seconds. Now Resonance and Divert are also on this tier list. They are mostly for the fact that it would add the duration where they can be used, so it just doesn't change any way that it actually interacts with the time frame. It's just it gives you an extended duration where it can actually, you can get that hit and actually get the HP or the adrenaline from it. Overall, I think this makes the effectiveness of shields much higher, as well as more desirable, as well as making tank gear somewhat more desirable by adding these changes. So we're going to just quickly recap the 4 main points that I hit on today. So accessibility being a huge one. I think stuff like Tetsu and Sea Singer, Death Lotus, those gears should be somewhat more accessible because they are tank gear and they're no longer relevant and or meta. So doesn't mean they are too difficult to get right now, but anything that's time gated seems to be an issue just in general with the game. So it doesn't make sense that you would rush Crypt Bloom at tier 90 than it would be to kind of scale up your tank armor. So I think Necromancy is the only one that did this well. Now the next point is the HP scaling, the same way that Death Warden does that. So Necromancy did another thing right by adding this. The HP scaling just gives it added durability, and that's going to be huge for tank gear. The third main point is adding the active effect to all tank gear. This is only logical that shields give you more damage while using tank gear, because right now the damage fall off from switching to a shield is too much, especially while using power gear. So I think this is good to add to all sets in the game, and of course the defensive reset is pretty good, but I think it would be too powerful at 8% to have that for a full set as a tank gear, especially with the previous video I talked about the raids refresh and adding reflect damage to like Tempest and Acto Tempest. I think with the defensive resets on that, it probably would be too powerful. So this is kind of with that in mind as well. So we're adding those two things together. And the fourth and final point is the shield ability scaling. So again, while using your tank gear, if you use that shield, you're going to get much more effectiveness out of the defensives. And this is another main point that I think just should be part of the game, where shields matter rather than right now where they're pretty much useless. You could use any kind of shield for a switch because you don't actually use most of your defensives. So I think they need to also add some, boss mechanics that require you to kind of like switch to a shield just for like an ability's duration of say 10 seconds, like Reflect or Barricade or something like that, instead of just being easily able to bypass everything. So this last video is going to wrap up the 4-part series known as the Dracolich problem. When I do PVM discussion videos in the future, it's probably going to be a little bit different format. I haven't quite figured out how I want to do it. But if you do like this series, please like, subscribe, comment in the video, and hopefully I will see you in some future videos. See you.